think a hero is someone who is brave and selfless and helps other people. Superman is the definition of a hero.
Superman can solve big problems, do these world-stopping feats. Really, where his power is as an inspiration.
If you think about Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, here were two young guys who were children of immigrant families writing about the experience of being the outsider, the underdog. This wish fulfillment that the underdog could be accepted, be a protector, and be a hero, and be embraced by the land that, as an outsider, he's come to.
The ability to see through things, keep vision, all these things that would just be the coolest to have. But on top of that, he's a good guy.
He was the ultimate power fantasy. Kids coming out of the Great Depression literally had no power, and for a dime they could read stories about this guy who had all the powers.
I was about 14 and I heard a kid scream down the block, and I ran to help him. He had fallen off his bike. I picked him up and ran him home. He was in my arms, and I could feel the wind as I was carrying him, and I could almost hear the George Reeves Superman theme music running in the back of my head. It's no better feeling than feeling like you're Superman. The only thing better than that is when you're feeling like Superman to somebody else.
My first memory of the character is seeing a grainy, scratchy, black and white image of Superman. Clearly it was the old George Reeves Superman show from the 50s. That was probably 4. I don't know who that guy is. It's a guy flying around and it looks cool.
I remember how thrilling the introduction was. It's a bird, it's a plane, it's Superman.
I lived very close to the Griffith Observatory. Why do I know the image of the Griffith Observatory? And it was because of the black and white Superman series.
Ah, Professor, Superman.
I stopped watching it, though, after Superman and the Mole Men, because that just freaked me right out. Only Superman can fix it.
He really didn't make that much impression, but I'll tell you who did, and that was Superboy. I remember as a kid seeing a Superboy comic with a really kind of disturbing cover. He was blind, and Krypto, the super dog, was his guide dog.
It's a bird! It's a plane! It's Superman!
When I was 15, I discovered the Fleischer Superman cartoons, and that made a tremendous impression on me.
The best version of conveying confidence is letting the other person know that they're in good hands. That's what George Reeves' Superman conveyed.
Now, it's all right. Take it easy.
He made you feel good because just being there, he let you know that you were taken care of.
Me and some of the other creative people on the show would kind of, spitball ideas. Oh, what are we going to do next? What are we going to do after Batman's done? And of course, inevitably, you think, oh, well, there's Superman. I wasn't all too keen on the idea because A, it seemed really obvious, and B, I knew exactly from the minute, Gene McCurdy first said to me, Batman cartoon, I knew kind of instantly what I wanted to do. Whereas with Superman, as much as I liked the character, I didn't really know exactly what I was going to do with him to make an animated series out of it.
Warner Brothers Animation at this time, the 90s and early 2000s, in kids' TV animation, was an Emmy factory, all thanks to Gene McCurdy. They hired the best people they could get at the jobs and then let those people do their work.
After Batman was finished, Steven Spielberg watched the Batman show and he really liked it. He said, I want to make a show with those guys. One of the pitches we developed was Freakazoid. Came up with the original idea and the design for it. That was the one that Steven really, really liked. My original idea was that it was going to be an action-adventure show with lots of humor. It kept becoming more of a humor show with some superhero elements in it. I didn't have a feel for it. I didn't think I was going to be able to execute that show to what Steven wanted it to be. Around that same time, Gene McCurdy would say, Kids WB is they're talking about doing a Superman show. Do you want to do a Superman show? And I went, yes.
You had this great team that had just done mind-blowing work with Batman, whose hands were ready to take on this new project.
We spent a lot of time trying to figure out what the character designs, learn the lessons of BTAS and apply them to this new show. And then for the background styling, we still kept it somewhat retro and somewhat Art Deco. It's not as dark and angular.
Batman's world was dark and gritty, kind of film noirish, and Superman's world is bright, it's optimistic. So it was doing something very familiar, but it was a completely different switch, and we all welcomed the change.
One of my own personal goals was to come up with a look of the show that was as distinctive as what we had done with Batman, but not exactly just the same look.
There'd been so many incarnations of Superman, and the idea of doing a new one was a very daunting experience for us.
And there were people kind of waiting for us to fail, saying Batman has this depth, this psychology, brooding cloud over him, and Superman just isn't as interesting a character. Would we be able to make a good series from Superman?
Initially, I did design the main cast. Brainiac was like the one villain that was even more period than BTAS.
It looked great, but we thought, well, that's not enough of a visual break from Batman's world.
A lot of back and forth, a lot of different stylistic things we tried. I got really stuck early on. It's like, I went back and looked at the original comics and I fell in love with the Joe Shuster style. So I did spend some time actually trying to bring the Shuster kind of stylistics to our animation style. The problem was that was also what the Fleischers had used for their big inspiration. That's where the bar is set when you're doing animated Superman. It's like, there's Fleischer Superman. It's like, that's the level that you're never going to hit. I knew early on that we weren't going to be able to use that as our goal. So whatever we came up with had to be unique on its own.
But even you must realize it's hopeless.
One of the great assets we had was in the tremendous creations of Jack Kirby. He was the defining creator of superheroes throughout most of the 20th century.
Jack Kirby is obviously one of my artistic idols. You can tell by looking at almost all of my shows and in my comics work as well. He did have a very specific design approach to science fiction type stuff.
And when the time comes, you and this primitive planet will swear allegiance to Darkseid.
So we thought that would be kind of a neat way of spicing up the show, would be to bring in Darkseid and Fourth World characters. Once we brought Darkseid on screen as one of our main bad guys for the series, then of course all of the Kirby stuff just went off the charts.
Welcome to Krypton.
Inside Brainiac, there's Kirby Crackle, which represents his quote-unquote face when he's just the AI before he has a human body. Broadcast standards and practices, the network censors are always very sensitive to gunplay in children's programming. On the old Batman show, anytime we had one of the bad guys pull out a gun and start firing, blasting away. But in a lot of classic Jack Kirby comics, policemen had a tendency to not just wear, 38s in their holsters. They had like these kind of stylized weapons.
Not a fact. Well, get ready to shoot.
It brought something a little bit new and a little bit fresh to our look. We spent a lot of time designing what Krypton looked like. We did stick to a slight Art Deco styling for the background designs. There's a whole other kind of sidebar branch of Art Deco that I ended up calling it Ocean Liner Deco. Because there's a lot of ocean liner posters back in the 1920s and 30s that had this kind of really stylized, kind of rounded shapes with straight edges.
I liked having all the different levels of roadways and things for Superman to fly past.
A color palette that still had weight to it. authenticity to it so that the show didn't look like a kid's cartoon, which I think is what people were worried that we were going to do.
Vehicles, didn't want to go back and do B-test style, so what can I do? What's different? So we came up with a bunch of different designs for Clark's car. We went a little bit futuristic with the vehicle designs. We knew for sure Lois was going to need a car to zip around town. It's not, Jetsons futuristic, but it's slightly futuristic. It's actually a pretty neat little car. We did give Superman a spaceship. Pa Kent had it out in his barn. It survived the trip to Earth, and Superman fixed it up and used it to fly into outer space anytime he had to go out into outer space and have adventures.
Superman to Star Labs. Can you read me?
And to make that seem logical, also he's going to need a space suit.
Bruce never rested. He would keep tweaking them and respond to fans and respond to his own artistic sensibility. There were very subtle things that happened as the show went on.
What's something new that we can do with this show? It's all been done.
Artists.
So we had to think bigger to come up with big challenges for Superman, while at the same time making him a little less powerful than he had been in other incarnations.
What is that?
Taking a cue from the Fleischers, if you see him struggle, you pull for him, and he's more believable.
When I lost my balance and fell, suddenly this big blue angel with red wings came down and caught me.
We did want this to stimulate thought and what would happen if there were these superheroes in our lives, how would we deal with them if they showed up now?
I remember thinking about the decades of work that had been done before, and I could only imagine the thousands of writers in Superman up until that point, and the honor of getting to contribute to this body of work.
Yeah, Lane.
We could really get into Lois Lane as a character. Clark as not just a one-beat reporter, but as a man who's made some choices in his life to live a certain way and help mankind. And there's a chance to broaden his world a little bit by bringing in Jonathan and Martha Kent to develop his relationship with his cousin Kara, who becomes Supergirl.
You'd be surprised at what I can do.
It really was a great chance to add a lot to his mythology and have a lot of fun with those characters.
Hi, guy!
I tended to get stories that dealt with more humorous situations with Superman, with contrasts. Lobo and Nixie, something where Superman is completely, almost powerless, but has to sort of outwit them and deal with it on a different level.
Ah, nuts.
Those were kind of fun episodes.
My card.
The idea that he came from another planet was there, and that he, worked as a reporter was there.
Kent! My office, now!
But all the other things that we look back as being so important to the Superman canon were added piecemeal over the years and in wildly different mediums.
I took it on as part of my job just to educate myself and read every story that had been written about Superman. Part of what was really exciting here was to get to do our takes on these characters.
Playtime is over.
Superman, in many incarnations over the years, was kind of corny. Christopher Reeve, Clark Kent, gosh golly, klutzy was what I think a lot of people were expecting. And the guys were real clear that we weren't going to do that.
Andrea found some great regular characters in Tim Daly and Dana Delaney as Clark and Lois, Clancy Brown as Lex Luthor.
Andrea and Bruce, they knew the characters so well that it really helped me get to know the character well.
Somehow we've got to even the odds. That's all right. We only need one.
Let's go 38. I always favored ensemble record for every single show that I ever did. Always better to have actors react off of each other, and when they could hear the other actors and the voices that they had created, it was much easier for them to create a voice that fit into that world.
We had brought Clancy Brown in for auditions for Superman. I'd always liked Clancy in the movies.
I went in with my best Superman voice, based on what I had seen from George Reeves.
It's like, Clancy, do you want to audition for Luthor while you're here?
For Christ's sake, now why do I always have to play the bad guy? I basically did a little bit of a slower version of my Superman impression as Lex Luthor.
That's right. Make him come to you.
Dana Delaney came in and I slated her. This is Dana Delaney as Lois Lane, take 1. It was completely silent. She didn't speak. And I said, Dana, you okay? And she said, I had to just take a second because I can't tell you how long I have waited to hear those words. She had wanted to play Lois Lane forever. We had these half-wall baffles. They separate the actors and they separate the sound. But you could stand up and see the actor sitting next to you. And so often, actors who had not done this work before would be seated next to somebody with a lot of experience and lots of talent, and they would literally stand up with their mouth open and just watch that experienced actor work and be so impressed, and that was always delightful to see.
I'm gonna personally lead the army that vaporizes you too.
Dana as Lois, very smart,
What about the story?
driven,
Hey, I'm not finished.
but also very funny. I think there was more of a variance with the Superman characters.
I wasn't sure you'd really come.
She is smitten with Superman. This is something she's never seen before, and she's a woman of the world. She's a reporter that's been around.
Aren't we getting a little personal?
Better now than never.
Having a selfless person like Superman needs a foil that is really challenging for him. Lex is a megalomaniac, narcissist.
The grateful president bestows heartfelt thanks on Metropolis's favorite son, Superman.
The fact that he's not as adored as Superman gets under his skin. It's one of his flaws.
There was always a great undercurrent of menace to him, where even if he's pleasant, you know he can turn on a dime and tinge everything with a dark threat.
You leave me and my operations alone, and I and my little green rock will leave you alone.
When we were all in the room together, you got a sense of the characters that people were creating. That's where the drama is. The contrast between this heroic, good-looking guy and all the twisted, damaged characters that surrounded him. I can't name all the actors. There's so many of them, but they were fantastic.
We had been playing with the psychological aspects of the villains on Batman and felt no reason to change on Superman.
I'm not some infernal machine. I'm human. I need food and rest.
We needed to make the villains relatable.
Most of Superman's villains were kind of older, heavyweight businessmen. God, there's just a bunch of guys in suits.
The villains in Superman are more about the external power that they wield. We still found new psychological, emotional origins for the characters.
Leave me alone.
I'm ready for that rematch.
Why did they go so crazy? What is it that's making Superman be the point of their contempt?
Toyman was another character who was kind of just a boring old guy in a suit in the comics. There's a guy that Glenn and Dan and I met at San Diego Comic-Con. He carries a dummy with him, and the dummy's name was George.
The Toyman was a tragic one whose childhood had been ruined by ugly Mannheim.
The bad man watched and laughed while the police locked the kindly toy maker in the dungeon. The poor little boy was bounced from foster home to foster home like a little toy that nobody wanted.
Ultimately, he's sympathetic. There's no room for sympathy because he's so scary.
Ah, you took my toy! You spoiled my fun!
Parasite seemed to me that he should start out as a character that was angry about being powerless. That's what drove him to become the villain that he became.
When I touch somebody, I get strong. I absorb their energy.
And that's really indicative of the kind of focus that Alan and Paul made sure we infused in all of our villains. Our villains were human beings first, for the most part, who were changed by technology or circumstance and became this villain.
Take a wrong step, Mr. Kent? What?
Bizarro was actually the most tragic of our characters, I think, for me. He was always kind of a buffoon and a clown in the comics.
Your makeup's rubbing off.
Being a flawed clone, he actually thinks he is Superman initially.
He looked like me. I no understand.
Now he had this sad background, this pathos that wasn't quite there in the beginning.
What am me?
Bizarro was really fun for me to play because he doesn't know that he's participating in something that's so damaging. He is certainly damaged.
Me no am Superman.
So well performed by Tim Daly.
Save Lois.
It's the only way to save your life.
Metallo lost his humanity and he made a deal with Lex.
I can't taste anymore. I can't smell. You don't know how this feels. It's driving me crazy.
Well, well. Alien in my own backyard.
And even Lex, with all of his genius, could have used his powers for good, but became so obsessed with power.
I control everything in this town, Superman. Your cooperation is not really necessary.
The writers found ways to let us human beings identify with the villains and the heroes of this superhuman universe.
So what say you, Brainiac?
One can appreciate Jor-El's hard work. However, he is still mistaken.
Alan Burnett came up with the idea that Brainiac comes from Krypton, just like Superman does.
Fewer beings who have the knowledge, the more precious it becomes.
Brainiac is basically a sentient computer and knows that the planet is doomed and abandons Krypton.
You're transmitting your memory to a satellite. You're saving yourself.
That proved that Brainiac was a self-serving character. When he shows up later in a humanoid form that he's made for himself, he becomes even more of a threat for Kal-El.
There's always something that people will recognize in themselves, a flaw or even a virtue that can be exploited in all of the villains of Superman.
He's coming.
Who is?
Darkseid.
Darkseid is a lot like Lex Luthor in that he looks at Superman as something he can't control. Logically, he must destroy him.
An episode called Tools of the Trade. That was our first hint of the Fourth World to people who'd never read a comic book in their life.
I mean, as they say in the comics, Darkseid is.
You may call me Darkseid.
He wants to utilize whatever Superman's got to accentuate his own power.
There arose two worlds. Worlds as different as daylight and darkness.
Darkseid really came into his own in a two-part episode called Apocalypse Now. Doing a giant widescreen adventure story on a TV budget and schedule, we did not have much experience with at the time.
Holy Hannah!
Darkseid comes to Earth, and he's going to create burn holes in the Earth and turn Earth into a sister planet of his planet, Apocalypse. This was literally a planetary invasion. There's a great scene in Apocalypse Now. It's in part 2. It's inspired by a scene in the Bible. Lucifer's on top of this mountaintop with Jesus, and he says, hey, everything down there, all of that can be yours. I was always struck by that scene. Well, I said, well, let's put that in the show.
The power you have now, it's nothing compared with what I'm offering you.
You know I can't do that.
Pity.
Since Kirby created him, the character kind of stuck around and became ultimately one of the biggest and baddest and most important villains in the DC universe.
If you won't be my knight, you will be my pawn.
When it came time to cast him, Ironside's name came up, and he came in, and he was just awesome.
Savor your moment of triumph, Superman. But remember, victory has its price.
When we first started on the show was when we heard that Jack Kirby had died, and as a crew, we went to his funeral. When we came back, Bruce designed Dan Turpin to be Jack Kirby.
This is our world, Ugly. You won't get it without a fight.
When we had decided to zap Dan in Apocalypse Now Part 2, we dedicated the show to him.
Go on, you mangy buzzards, and don't come back.
Dan!
And we gave Turpin Kirby's funeral.
In the end, the world didn't really need a Superman. Just a brave one.
So that was a very meaningful moment for all of us.
I think that Superman the Animated Series, much like Batman, much like the original Animaniacs, much like a lot of the Warner Brothers shows at that time, just happened to be created at the right time. There were a lot of people who just found tremendous outlets for their creativity and their passion, and it brought a lot of people together.
After the George Reeves black and white TV series, there was, of course, the wonderful Christopher Reeve movies. And then there wasn't a lot of Superman activity until our series.
It was lightning in a bottle. Bruce insisted that we have an incredible team.
Because you bring such light and such positive feeling to an endeavor like that, it's really going to be something that endures.
Between Batman and Superman and the other shows that we did after, we did a couple of 100 episodes of shows that all fit within a persistent universe. We were never allowed to repeat ourselves. The bar was really high to keep bettering ourselves and keep learning new tricks.
The show had scale, scope, and we also introduced new characters to the Superman mythos that people had not seen before with the infusion of the Kirby world. It was really amazing, and it did make a huge impression on people.
Let's finish it.
Very well. This world dies now.
Superman stepped into our consciousness and represented the best versions of what the alien arriving could mean. It was an assurance that the ultimate expression of power, science fiction, would be benevolent. Yet another thing Superman represents is the American fabric. Clark Kent was raised in Kansas and moved to the city. He was this fusion of the small-town country morals with cosmopolitan sophistication, and in addition to everything else, Superman represented this idea that the best of America was in the fusion of the best of its parts.
I think he taps into some subconscious well of the human experience. It is important not only to Americans, but to everyone around the world.
Do I have a deal for you?
There was a crossover episode with Batman. Lex and the Joker teamed up. I'm listening. And I remember Mark and being starstruck.
See? Solid kryptonite.
Because he was Luke, and he was also a tremendous joker. And then he walks in the room and he's just the most adorable, cuddly guy you ever want to meet. And even though I was starstruck initially, I just fell in love.
I love you too.
Remember who you are and the legacy you carry inside you.
Superman is born of a sort of purity of spirit, a kindness. Kids, especially at an early age, really respond to that. He is just an amazingly accessible character to them.
You actually care about them geeks.
They're human beings.
They call him the Boy Scout because he will always do the right thing. Batman, however, is completely human and can make all kinds of mistakes, and does in his life.
There's a condition on your staying here. You can't ever use your powers to hurt people.
What Superman represents to me is absolute truth, honesty, honor, all the things that we are searching for in our leaders today.
Are you all right?
I'm fine. Gotta go.
The dream of flying, helping other people is something that is intoxicating. And there's nobody better in the world than Superman.
I like a Superman who can't just push the entire planet Earth out of the path of an asteroid.
My name is Orion.
Trying to keep all of the larger-than-life elements, the fantasy elements, but at the same time trying to update the characters and the villains and the supporting cast in a way that made them seem a little bit more modern and up-to-date. So that's kind of what we tried to do as well.
There's a man and a woman fighting!
We all want to believe that the future is bright. The best in people will come out.
That's one for the home team.
A protector will take care of us.
They're all yours.
We all want to believe that we can be that protector. The fantasy of being Superman will never grow old.